Angels Care Home Health, serving Hayes and the surrounding areas, is a Medicare-certified home health agency providing quality skilled nursing and restorative therapy services to patients in their homes.
And the Angel Care nurse comes to see me once a week.
Angels Care is there to help 24 hours a day, and all services are covered 100% by Medicare for patients who are eligible.
Angel Care has helped to stay home.
Angels Care Home Health. We serve patients.
Eagle Community Television presents Community Connection with your host, Mike Cooper.
Hello and welcome again to Community Connection from Eagle Community Television. Thanks for watching, and thanks as always to our producer, Jeff Durall. We're at Rarick Hall on the campus of Fort Hays State University, third floor, and we're visiting with Dr. Chapman Rackaway, Professor of Political Science and the recipient of the 2015 President's Distinguished Scholar Award. And the Distinguished Scholar Award, we have found out, comes with a medallion, which is rather sizable and rather formidable, Dr. Chapman. This thing's heavy. Are you required to wear this around your neck with the stooped shoulder and everything?
I've considered, because you have to wear this at commencement, graduation, so I've considered having a back brace handy, because that thing, that said, it's tough for me to take that thing off. That's it's a beautiful piece of art, and it's a nice reminder of this award, which I'm incredibly proud to have received.
And an award, as was noted by President Mirta Martin, that was somewhat of a surprise to Professor Rackaway when it occurred.
I think that what President Martin liked the most was that, and I can't blame anyone for being tired of me with my media presence, it caught me a little speechless. And I was utterly unprepared. When this had been done in the past, normally the recipient just stands up, and this is at convocation at the beginning a session for the academic year. And so the established practice had been that the recipient goes up there and they get some nice things said about them, and they go sit down. And unbeknownst to me, because you don't know you're going to get the award, and then President Martin says, "Go ahead and say a few words." Well, okay. Completely unprepared for any of that stuff. So yeah, people got to see me speechless, and that seems to more than the work that I've done, more than what I said there. The fact that someone caught me speechless seems to have resonated, which probably says more negative things about me than I'd care to admit.
But when you move into the classroom as Professor Rackaway, then I'm sure your students respond favorably to the distinguished scholar being in their presence.
I'd hope so. They seem to enjoy being able to make fun of the note that I had made, which is that it's one of the few times that distinguished and my name get used in the same sentence. So you take those little victories when you can get them.
Well, part of the responsibility, if you will, of the Distinguished Scholar for the year is to be featured speaker at the 27th Honors Convocation, which occurred last week. And your topic was, by the way, well received. I've already talked to two professors in the building who were there and said it was excellent. And so it was well received. The topic, Operator Error, Civic Failure, and its Threat to American Democracy. I love that title. What's this all about? What do you mean?
Well, it comes out of, basically it's the culmination of a lot of my career of trying to develop a voice as a political scientist. I'd been a political operative, and then I move into academia. And so that history of trying to convince people to engage with certain political candidates, certain ideas, the frustrations that I felt there have helped inform my research agenda ever since. Because we, in the public, tend to be trapped in this set of conventional wisdom that most of our problems in politics are caused by the politicians themselves. They're caused by organized interests. They're caused by X, Y, and Z. But what we never do when we're shining this light on the problems of our politics is we never turn them on ourselves as voters. And so civic failure is the disengagement of the public measured by trust in government, voter turnout, and other measures of engagement, along with low levels of information and knowledge. Only about 48% of the public know who the Speaker of the House is. You combine those two into a very toxic cocktail that undermines the very design of American government. I started out that talk with one of the key quotes in my book. I talk about how the Constitution was designed relatively secretively. So people wanted to know what this was. And as they were emerging from the convention, woman stops Benjamin Franklin, says, "What kind of government have you given us?" And he says, "A republic if you can keep it." We all focus on the first two words, but like typical Americans, we stop paying attention about halfway through. We focus on the "a republic," not those last words, if you can keep it. And so my general argument in the book is we're not keeping the republic. We're not engaging in the care and feeding of American democracy adequately as voters. And so we've tried to automate or outsource so many of our responsibilities to keep elected officials accountable. Campaign finance reform, political primaries, initiative and referendum, term limits. And all of them make the problems that we have worse because they address symptoms and not root causes.
Well, then as voters, we have a responsibility. Is this a unique responsibility to the United States? Because we have seen other elections in other countries where turnout responsibility has been 80, 90% sometimes?
It is worse here in the United States than in most other Republican democracies, and small r, meaning a representative democracy. But we've seen voter turnout drop across Europe even, which has much higher turnout rates than we do, but they've dropped from the high 80s, the low 90s, down into the low to mid 70s. It's not nearly as bad as it is here, where we dance a jig when we knock on the door of 60% for a presidential election, and somehow the 9% that we get in primary and caucus elections doesn't even make us bat an eyelash. So while it is a general problem worldwide, it is particularly acute here in the United States.
Well, now, some of those things that you mentioned, Dr. Rackaway, such as the voter IDs, the other things that have been, the gerrymandering, things that have been put in place, have they rigged the system to where voters think it doesn't make any difference anyway, so why bother? Is that what's happening here?
No, and in fact, when it comes to things like gerrymandering, it comes to things like money in politics, I take a very hard stance on those, because I believe that what they do is they encourage voters or enable voters to willfully disengage and not take in their own voice and their
as
own
an
responsibility.
excuse, if you will.
That's exactly right. It's justification. You know how you wake up in the morning. Like I work out in the mornings, which I know it's hard to believe a guy this fat works out in the mornings, but I do. But every now and again, I'll wake up and I don't quite feel right, and I'll come up with some kind of excuse not to work out, and that's why I'm so overweight, quite frankly. But it's that same lack of discipline that voters apply to their own life. It is, the Koch brothers have this election bought and paid for. Why do I need to vote? And it's wrong. Gerrymandering, it really only plays in at the margins. Self-selection, where we've kind of placed ourselves where we live, has a lot more to do. A great book called The Big Sort that explains how people have become more like-minded in their neighborhoods over the last 20 years, actually even further back than that. Though that kind of self-selection explains a lot more than gerrymandering, since that was one of the things that you mentioned. But still, what people don't realize is that in not using their voice, they're really opening up these opportunities for other factors to come into play and subvert the process from what people want it to be. And I focus a lot on money, obviously, because it's one of the big bugaboos in politics. And we've got some disconnects there. We've got some problems. But more than anything, what people don't realize is that no matter who it is, whether it's Charles Koch or Mike Cooper, you can flood money into politics and it never, ever will trump the vote of the public. Money doesn't vote, and any candidate will tell you in a moment of honesty, the money that they raise is only as good as the outreach it gets them to earn themselves votes. Let's take an example here. Look at Tim Huelskamp. He's the congressman of this district. And he's a pretty staunch NRA supporter. If you got rid of all money in politics, would there be any change in his voting behavior? Absolutely not. It is, and if people were really correct that politicians were able to be bought, paid for, and traded like so many monopoly properties, then Huelskamp could theoretically be bribed by the Brady Group and gun control advocates, just pump more money into his campaign, and he'd switch his vote. And doesn't that sound a bit naive to think that Huelskamp would, and just as an example, would subjugate his own belief system for a $5,000 contribution? Yes, it is, because that's not how things work. But somehow that's what people have conveniently convinced themselves, mostly as an enabling justification to disengage. And ironically, unfortunately, it's what makes the problem worse all the time. The more disengagement we have, the easier it is for these groups to get access to the system.
Really, not showing up to vote is really a negative vote, or is a plus vote for the side that's represented by a voter who turns out and shows up there.
It's exactly right. These politicians are career focused. If you don't cast a vote, it is the same as saying, I endorse everything you do, despite the fact that people believe that it's a protest. It's not a protest. The way you protest is you go in there and you vote for someone else. And one of the things I point out is that we love to talk about throwing the bums out. You look at Donald Trump, look at Ben Carson, all these outsiders, to a certain extent even Bernie Sanders. People love this idea of cleaning house, but then they get the opportunity, and 90% of the time when an incumbent runs for office, they win.
The presidential campaign and part of the distinguished scholar presentation you made at the Honors Convocation, Operator Error, is really based on a book that's coming.
That's right. And this whole book it really takes these concepts and applies them. It says that we are not keeping the republic. We have become, mostly because of a lack of linkage institutions, weakness in political parties, is what really separates us out from these other countries, why their turnout is higher, their engagement is higher, and so on. When the parties stepped away, that forced us to do things ourselves that we weren't ready for, didn't have time for, weren't prepared for. So we're reaping what we've sown. We look for the low-hanging fruit of political reform, campaign finance, term limits, political primaries, most notably. Those are 3 of the chapters in the book. But at the core of it, a confused or oversimplified electorate, which is supposed to be guiding these politicians, sending them mixed messages, and we're getting exactly the government that we've designed. We just don't realize that all of these things are byproducts of the confused and schizophrenic inputs that we're providing.
What's the timeline on the book, Dr. Rackaway?
Well, as with so many academic books, it's supposed to be in by December 1st to the publisher, and then there will be a peer review process, and then hopefully there might be a few edits, and then it goes out for publication, hopefully in May. But considering that I've been in a race with my esteemed colleague Brad Will for who can take on more job titles this past year, things keep getting pushed back a little bit. Doing the acting chair role in my department, and then I've taken on a new position that they've created here as our director of liberal education. And so there's so many of these days, okay, I've got 2 hours of a block to write, and then, oh, there comes an email. There go those 2 hours. So I'm hoping that by next summer we'll have a piece in print.
We'll be looking forward to it. Oh, and don't miss Dr. Rackaway's column occasionally on Insight Kansas as well, as he writes for the Insight Kansas group in the state. Dr. Chapman Rackaway, Professor of Political Science in 2015, President's Distinguished Scholar, complete with a medallion on our community connection.
Angels Care Home Health, serving Hayes and the surrounding areas, is a Medicare-certified home health agency providing quality skilled nursing and restorative therapy services to patients in their homes.
They're polite. I mean, they just take the time for you.
Angels Care is there to help 24 hours a day, and all services are covered 100% by Medicare for patients who are eligible.
I like the Angels for what they've done for me.
Angels Care Home Health. We serve patients.